Spider-Man Miles Morales, from the moment it was announced, was a bit of a strange game. Was it an expansion? Was it a true sequel to the universally beloved Spider-Man PS4? Was it simply DLC? Honestly, for the past few months, even I wasn't sure. Luckily though, I wasn't able to get a PlayStation 5 until just over a week ago, so I was able to hear from reviewers everywhere what this game truly was. A side game in the universe of Marvel's Spider-Man. An Arkham Origins, an Uncharted Lost Legacy, a game intended to simply build on the first game as opposed to bouncing off it. So I went into Miles Morales with reduced but still decently sized expectations, especially after experiencing the near perfect Spider-Man adaptation that is Spider-Man Remastered. But despite taming my hype for Miles Morales, I was still a little disappointed. Now let me get this out the way first. This game is by no means bad. Insomniac have a consistent streak of quality fundamental game design that continues with Miles Morales, bringing back the incredible foundation that Spider-Man PS4 built. First and foremost, the web swinging, which is essentially a further polished version of the original, with the added moveset of Miles integrating perfectly into the momentum-based system Insomniac already had, and it truly does bring a feeling of exaggerated swagger. Sorry, I had to. Along with that, the combat brought over from the original is still the engaging dynamic system, reminiscent of Arkham's free flow, but with so much added flair. Along with that, the decision to replace most of Peter's gadgets with Miles' Venom powers was the perfect way to make Miles feel significantly less experienced than his mentor, without the player feeling powerless. Although I have to say, Miles having holograms to fight for him is a bit of a jarring feeling. Actually, there's way too many people in this game that just so happen to be experts in holograms, and from my brief experience of New York, I can say that there's not too many AR holograms sprinkled around the place. Honestly, the decision for Peter to have built this massively high-tech AR system throughout the entire city kinda disconnected me from his character. Sure, it's just a plot device to add some side content, but the fact that this broke down on his luck scientist who was evicted in the last game suddenly has the resources to build city-wide hologram training courses, it just kind of threw me off. Peter Parker is not Bruce Wayne, and there are other ways to have training without augmented reality. The rest of the side content sprinkled around the world is pretty subpar, although I've got to say the peak of this game might just be the new Spider-Man app that gives you alerts of citizens in need of your help, which perfectly brought in that feeling of being a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, a feeling that the main game often lacks. And to be honest, Miles Morales' main story is where the game falters the most. Now again, I wouldn't call this campaign bad per se, but the step down in quality of writing is more than noticeable, with the relationships and characters that were built so perfectly in the original not working nearly as well in Miles Morales, and the story as a whole having nowhere near the impact. The narrative problems are honestly not major, but there's so many of them that compound to make it nothing more than mediocre. Firstly, there's plenty of cringeworthy lines, something that isn't necessarily uncommon in Spider-Man media, but instead of having a cringeworthy charm like they do in, say, the Raimi films, so much of Miles Morales' bad dialogue sounds like it came from an out-of-touch 45-year-old. This isn't really helped by the performances, which some characters nail and others not so much. Far and away, the best scenes in this game consist of honest, heartfelt conversations, usually between Miles and his mum, that really shine a light on how well Insomniac understands Spider-Man as a character, and why his stories resonate with so many people. But when these moments are intercut with borderline erotic interrogation scenes and predictable twists with underdeveloped, boring characters, it's hard to truly get invested in anything that's going on. The motivations of the Tinkerer are skewed and misguided, especially considering the character is supposedly a borderline genius. The relationship between Miles and his uncle is flat, and Steven Krieger is just a fucking caricature. That leaves Miles' journey to become his own Spider-Man as the only truly interesting plot thread tying the game together. However, it's essentially wrapped up halfway through the game, leaving the end of the plot to be more of a chore than a massively interesting climax. Speaking of chores, we all know that I criticize mission design a lot, and once again we see a notable step down from Spider-Man PS4. Now, the original game was by no means some magnum opus of level design. There was plenty of arenas where you're left to fight waves of enemies, but in Miles Morales this is taken to another level, to the point where half the main story missions feel like complete padding. Most missions consist of Miles breaking into some restricted area filled with guards. You can then take out these guards stealthily with the assumption that it'll continue the story. However, instead of being rewarded for your efforts, the game simply throws another wave of enemies at you, and at times multiple more waves. None of what you do in half of these missions has any bearing, has any necessity. When I fight prisoners in Spider-Man 1, I'm trying to stop a prison escape, but when I do it in Miles Morales, it's simply for the sake of doing it. There's no incentive provided to the player, there's no reason behind why the enemies are even showing up, they just exist to be beaten, and to put it simply, it's just boring. Even the chase sequences are massively downgraded, with the high-speed action through the city in the original becoming mindless scripted chases to lead you from cutscene to cutscene. The gameplay elements that Miles Morales did add though, I will give it credit for. They are by no means revolutionary, but the puzzle sections involving Miles' electrical powers at least provides variety to an otherwise repetitive gameplay loop. I love Marvel Spider-Man, and I love Miles Morales as a character, so I was hugely excited to see where this game would go with the character. I wish I loved Spider-Man Miles Morales more, in spite of its downgraded mission design, its narrative flaws, and its padded runtime. And yes, I do think that despite all its negatives, it's still fundamentally a good Spider-Man game. But I know for a fact that if Insomniac had focused all of their efforts and resources into this game instead of the weak DLC of the original, then it could have been so much better. The potential Spider-Man Miles Morales had was so much higher than what it is, and for that I can only call it one thing: decent, but disappointing. But I am sure that I'll have plenty of people who disagree with me. So feel free to comment down below and tell me, do you agree with me, do you disagree with me, what do you think of Spider-Man Miles Morales, do you hate my guts? Let me know. Also, if you did enjoy the video, it'd really genuinely be appreciated if you'd hit like, and if you're new here and want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe with those notifications turned on. We are doing daily December uploads, so jump on the bandwagon. With all that being said though, I've been Joe, aka Founder Scarab, and I'll see you in the next one.